my lovely library lions. Today I'm going to be doing a book tag. I was tagged by Jim's Books Reading and Stuff, and he tagged me in the L tag because I am Literary Lion and that's 2 L's. So let's just get right into the questions. Question number 1 is L is for Louise L'Amour. What is your favorite Louise L'Amour book? So as far as I know, he is a Western writer, and I don't really read that sort of fiction, so I've never actually read one of his works. I can't say what my favorite would be. I don't think it's really a genre that's for me. I've never picked up one or saw one in a store or saw a cover and thought that I wanted to read a Western, so it's not really something that I'm looking into. Question number 2 is L is for love. What is your favorite literary love story? This is pretty hard. I like a lot of love stories in fiction, especially because I read mainly young adult fantasy, which has a lot of subplots that are romantic plot lines. I read a lot of just young adult in general, which always tends to have some aspect of romance in it, and I'm going to be a little bit basic, and it's probably going to be Kaz and Inej. They are my favorite couple. I adore Kaz as a character. I love the very, very slow build-up of their relationship, and I just love how they don't quite... It's not a very passionate and steamy romance. It's a very slow build with a lot of little moments, and you can just tell how much they absolutely adore each other throughout the book. And I want to see it... I guess it did kind of have an ending, but not the ending that I hoped for, so I'm hoping for Six of Crows 3 so that I get a firm and solid ending for Kaz and Inej, because I think they deserve to be happy together after they work through their own personal traumas. Question number 3 is L is for language. What languages can you read in? I can read in English, obviously, very well. English is my first language, and I've been reading it since I was in kindergarten. I can also read in French. A little harder for me. I've never really read a French book and enjoyed it because I do struggle with some of the aspects of the grammar and the sort of conjugational stuff. I can read in it. I will read something and understand it well enough that I have comprehension of it, but as far as reading a full fictional story and enjoying a story, there's a lot of little grammar details in French, like even things about how they denotate that someone... Is that a word? I think it's a word. How they denote that someone is talking is different, so it's a lot of a choppier experience for me when I'm reading a story. Again, I can understand what's happening, I will be able to get the gist of reading something in French, but I don't really enjoy reading a book in French because it's not my first language, and it's a language I do struggle with a little bit when it comes to the more complex aspects of it. So if I needed to read like a document, or if I needed to understand something, if I needed to read a sign, I'd be fine doing that. I could manage that. A whole book, I would understand the main plot, but I wouldn't really enjoy it or get any of the nuances or that sort of thing. Question number 4 is L is for lingo. Are there any words in other languages that English doesn't really have an equivalent for? Of course, there are thousands of words that English hasn't developed an equivalent for. Something that English is really good at doing is stealing words and just putting them into English without really changing them. So we do have even words that are used commonly in English that technically don't have an English equivalent because we're just using the foreign language word. I can't think of any that really matter to me right now. The only word that I am attached to from a foreign language that doesn't have an equivalent is sundoku from Japanese, which is just the act of buying books and not reading them and letting them pile up in your home. I am trying not to be guilty of that. I try to read every book that I do bring into my house, but it does take me years to get to them, so I'm on the very edge of becoming a sundoku. Question number 5 is L is for literary fiction. What is your understanding of the term literary fiction? I don't really think about this a lot. I know that literary fiction is often what we have to read in school and those sorts of stories. So things like The Great Gatsby, Pride and Prejudice, those are all considered literary fiction. But there is newer literary fiction as well, and as far as I know, and I haven't Googled this to look if I'm right or not, it's stories that focus more on the human condition and just the act of being human. So something like Little Fires Everywhere is literary fiction. It's about a whole town and how they deal with this issue of a baby being stolen from its mother and adopted by a white family where they are not going to grow up with their culture and be able to understand who they are as a person. And that would be newer literary fiction. Often literary fiction seems to be touted as sort of like the peak of literature. Like, fantasy is just fiction that you're imagining stuff. It's not important. Literary fiction tends to be realistic. It's gritty. It tends to deal with real world issues, and it always gets awards. It's respected. There's tons of book clubs that focus on it. I'm not a big fan of literary fiction. I will pick up a piece here or there if it's really, really good, if everyone who's read it has loved it, but I'm more a fantasy person. I want to escape. I don't want to read about how horrible real life can be and how complex issues are. It's fine sometimes, but I have enough of that in real life. I want to read something about fairies or dragons and just entirely escape from the real world. Question number 6 is L is for Lolita. Have you read Lolita and what did you think about it? I have not read it. I have no intention of reading it. I think it's a often misrepresented book based on what I've heard people who have read it say. Obviously it's a book meant to be written from sort of a villain's perspective, but I think because of how the culture has developed around it, it's essentially become a flagship for certain sorts of people, so I don't really enjoy that is what that book is representing, even if it wasn't the author's original intent, clearly. And its association with the fashion has made it kind of hard for people in that fashion to sort of cut themselves off because they don't want to be associated with the themes of Lolita, and the fashion of Lolita is an entirely separate endeavor that just unfortunately shares a name with it. So it's messy. I don't see the value in reading it for me. It's not a book that I'm going to enjoy. It's not a book that I think has anything to say that I need to be told. Yeah, what happens in Lolita is bad, and he is a criminal, and anyone who reads it and sees something else, I am highly questioning. I have lost track entirely of what number I'm on, but the next question is L is for London. What is your favorite book set in London? So I like a lot of fiction set in London. Harry Potter's the first one that comes to mind, but I actually really, really adore Black Butler, and I think Black Butler does a fantastic job of illustrating London, of showing the culture at the time. The art and the fashion that are included in it and the food are just all so well researched, although obviously the fashion does skew a little bit to Lolita, which is another L word, and not necessarily traditional Victorian fashion, but I really love that the way that they've twisted it. I like the paranormal aspect of it. Speaking of paranormal London, I also really like the Dark Days Club, which takes place in the Regency period in London. Essentially anything between sort of Regency and Victorian era London I am in love with, I want to read more of, and I would love any book set in there, so it's really hard for me to choose a favorite because that's one of my favorite settings. Yeah, I'm sort of a London trash person because I've never been to London. There's no reason for me to be so attached to these, but I think maybe because I grew up so heavily with Harry Potter, I have a very rosy view of London that is obviously not reality. But in fiction, I really, really like to explore that area. Then we have L is for Librarian. Do you have a favorite librarian? I haven't been to the library in about 6 or 7 years, I want to say. I buy all my books now, so I don't really borrow them. I don't have a reason to go to the library. I used to spend every day after school in high school at the library, and I still didn't really interact with the librarian. I like to go to the library and sit somewhere quiet. I like to find my own books. I don't really need to interact with anyone while I'm there, so I've never been attached to a librarian. Obviously what they do is super important. They're super helpful not only for finding books, but they do all sorts of things that I think most people don't realize fall under the librarian umbrella, like helping people to use computers, helping people with resumes. They are just a fantastic resource for research and anything like that. I immensely respect the profession, but I don't personally know any librarians, and I've never sort of had a relationship with a librarian that I felt was special. And we have L is for last. It is the last question, and it is, what is the last book you read? The last book that I read at the time of filming this video was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I am reading it, or was reading it, with a friend of mine, and we were buddy reading it one chapter a night, and it was super, super fun. I really loved reading it with her, and it was so fun to have someone to scream with about all the things that happen, especially because it's a romance and you want to scream about how cute the characters are being. And I'm definitely going to pick up the sequel to this. I am trash for characters who are similar to Rysand. I always want to say Rysand. I know that's not how it's pronounced, but it's how it's pronounced in my heart. But I'm trash for that character archetype. I know it's been overdone recently, but I'm here for it. That's the kind of boy that I like. I want a dark, broody, dangerous boy who's secretly soft and sad on the inside. And I like him to be a little bit spicy, even if in real life I wouldn't necessarily want that sort of relationship. So that is it for today's tag. I really had fun with this. I like that Jim is doing the whole alphabet and he's making questions for each letter of the alphabet. I think it's such a big undertaking, and it's really fun to see him come out with his new questions, and the fact that he always tags a few people and gives them something to do. Of course, I always appreciate when people tag me, so thank you so much, Jim, and I hope that you all are having a lovely weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and take care until I see you next time.